Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, my name is Daniel. A normal office worker living in a city that is not too noisy but not quiet either. The daily work is always full of reports, long calls, and stressful meetings that make my mind always tense. I am a person who has trouble sleeping. Many nights I lie awake for hours just hoping to have a deep sleep. One day, I happened to read an article online about an application that listens to the sound of rain. It is advertised to be able to put the listener into a state of absolute relaxation and quickly fall asleep. I was interested and decided to download it to try. The application has a simple name, Rain Sounds. Its icon is a blue water drop on a black background. As soon as I opened the application, I was greeted by a very minimalist interface, with only a few buttons to choose from: light rain, thunderstorm, rainforest rain, and a strange button called Dream Loop. I didn't pay much attention, just thought it must be some kind of special effect. That night, after taking a shower, I lay down, turned on my phone, and selected the light rain mode. The sounds started to ring, the drops of water falling. The rhythm was steady and gentle, as if falling on the old porch roof. My eyes gradually closed, my body relaxed. For the first time in many weeks, I felt like I was falling asleep so easily. I don't know when I fell asleep. I only remember that when I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of an unfamiliar street. The whole street was filled with rain, each heavy raindrop falling and soaking my clothes. The street lights cast a pale yellow light. Everything was blurred because of the thick rain curtain. I called out loudly, but no one answered. The surroundings were so quiet that only the sound of the rain echoed. I walked and walked, but the street seemed to have no end. No matter which direction I turned, I only saw dark houses and the sound of rain pouring down endlessly. Just as I was starting to feel uneasy, a figure appeared in the distance. I hurried over, hoping to find someone who could explain what was going on. As I got closer, I saw that it was a woman in a long coat, her wet hair covering half her face. She stood motionless, just staring at me. I tried to ask her questions, but she didn't answer. Instead, she slowly pointed to the end of the street. I looked in the direction of her hand, only to see a dark, dim area. A chill ran down my spine, and when I turned around, the woman had disappeared as if she had never been there. I was terrified, my heart pounding, and I tried to run back the same way. But the street kept repeating itself. The houses were identical, the windows were closed and silent. There was not a single sign of life. The rain continued to fall, cold and stifling. I began to realize that this was not a normal dream. Everything was so real. Every drop of rain falling on my skin was so clear that it made me shiver. I screamed, trying to hit myself in the face to wake up, but it didn't work. I was trapped. In desperation, I remembered the Dream Loop button on the app. A strange feeling rose in me, as if it was the key that led me into this nightmare. My mind was in panic, but also aroused a terrifying curiosity. Maybe I had accidentally turned on that mode, and now I was trapped in a loop that I couldn't escape. Suddenly, at the end of the street, a light flashed. I saw an old wooden door lying alone in the rain and wind. Without hesitation, I rushed towards it, hoping to find a way out. When I touched the doorknob, a horrible screech rang out. The door opened to reveal a long staircase leading down to the underground. Cold air blew against my face, carrying a strong, musty smell. I hesitated, but had no choice. I had to go down with each step I passed. The sound of the rain gradually faded, but instead, strange sounds echoed from below. There were whispers like many people talking, mixed with creepy giggles. I tried to walk faster, hoping to find the end. Finally, I came to a dark room. When the weak light from the ceiling bulb fell down, I was stunned to realize that the room was filled with beds. On each bed lay a person lying still, face pale, eyes closed, as if in a deep sleep. I approached a bed and was horrified to realize that it was myself. I found myself lying motionless, breathing slowly as if being controlled by someone. This fact almost drove me crazy. I screamed, running around the room looking for an exit, but only saw endless rows of beds. Each bed had a different version of me sleeping. At that moment, I realized that I had fallen into a dream loop, an endless loop created by the app. I tried to scream in despair, the screams fading into the dense space. At that moment, a voice rang out right next to my ear, low and cold. It whispered to continue going down. This loop had only just begun. I stood in the middle of the dark room, where rows of beds stretched out endlessly, each one containing a different version of me sleeping. The sound of the rain outside seemed to have disappeared, replaced by whispers echoing from all directions. They echoed from the damp walls, from the cold floor, and even from the motionless bodies sleeping on the beds. I held my head, trying to stop myself from being swept away by the sounds. A special voice rang out more clearly, right next to my ear, as if someone was standing close by, whispering, "Daniel, we've been waiting for you for a long time." I turned around in panic, but there was no one. There was only the thick darkness and the flickering yellow light on the ceiling. The closed eyes of the versions of me on the beds seemed to start to move, their eyelids trembling as if about to open. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, a giggle sounded from the end of the room. The laughter was high-pitched and cold, like a woman's voice. I looked in that direction and saw a shadow standing right next to the wall. She was thin, her long, messy hair covered her face. Water dripped from her fingertips, each drop falling to the tile floor like a never-ending rain. I stammered to ask her who she was, why I was here. But all I got in return was laughter echoing throughout the room, like dozens of voices overlapping each other. I started running, rushing towards the wooden door behind me, hoping to find an exit. But the longer I ran, the longer the hallway seemed. Whispers surrounded me, each word sounding as if my own clones were speaking. They whispered to stay, to fall asleep with them. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound still crept into my head, as if it was being transmitted directly into my mind. Finally, I rushed into another door that appeared at the end of the hallway. When I slammed it shut, the room inside was dark and cramped. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I shivered and turned around to see a pale face, its black eyes without pupils, staring at me. Its mouth moved, emitting incoherent but creepy whispers. I jumped back, my back hitting the cold wall. That face was none other than my own, but distorted and ghostly, like a distorted shadow of myself. Each word it breathed out felt like a knife cutting into my ears. "You can't escape. You're just one of countless versions trapped in this loop." Every time the sound of rain rang out, a new dream opened and a new version of you was trapped. I gasped, trying to deny it, but deep in my mind I began to feel that it might be true. While I was still bewildered, the face suddenly shattered like a cracked mirror. turning into thousands of dark pieces that rushed straight at me. I screamed, woke up, and realized I was on the wet, rainy street again. This time, the streetlights were off, leaving only darkness and heavy rain. The whispering did not disappear, but continued to echo in the rain. I realized I had not woken up, but had just been pulled into another layer of the loop in the distance. The figure of the woman with wet hair appeared again, this time standing right in the middle of the street, her face raised to reveal her lifeless white eyes. She spread her arms wide, as if welcoming me. Around me, a series of other shadows began to appear in the rain, all of them bearing the familiar appearance of myself. They walked closer, their eyes lifeless, their mouths whispering the same sentence in unison. "Stay with us." I panicked and turned to run. My feet felt heavy, as if the rain was holding me back. With each step, a horrible screech rang out from the shadows behind me. There were more and more of them, covering the entire street. I didn't know where to run, because whether I turned left or right, the street continued endlessly. Just as I was about to collapse, a door of light appeared in the middle of the street. It seemed like the only fragile escape. I rushed forward, not looking back. The whispering grew louder, creepy, like hundreds of souls screaming in the rain. I pushed the door open, rushing inside. Darkness swallowed me once more. When I opened my eyes, I found myself sitting in my own bedroom. The phone was still on the table. The Rain Sounds app was still on. The screen was dimly lit. I was panting, sweat drenching my body. But just as I was about to close the app, I heard a familiar whisper ringing right next to my ear. It whispered in my own voice, cold and creepy. "Daniel, tonight has only just begun." I sat on the bed, staring at my phone, which was still dimly lit with the Rain Sounds app running. The sound of the rain pattered as if I was still standing outside, not in my room. I told myself that this was just a dream, that everything I had just experienced was just a figment of my stress-induced imagination. But when I took a deep breath, I realized that the air in the room was damp and cold. The musty smell was strong, as if the room had been abandoned for a long time. I glanced around. The usually white walls were now streaked with water streaks running down the wooden floor. The ceiling dripped water droplets onto the floor, creating puddles that reflected the faint light. I shivered. I had never seen my room like this. I stepped out of bed, the cold water seeping into my bare feet, making me shiver again. The mirror hanging on the opposite wall reflected my reflection, but something was wrong. The image in the mirror looked paler, the eyes sunken, the hair drenched as if it had been in the rain. I raised my hand to my face, my skin still dry, but the image in the mirror was different. I tried waving. The reflection in the mirror slowed down by half a beat, its eyes staring at me like a stranger. My heart started to pound. I retreated towards the bed. The whispering rang out again, clearer this time, coming from all over the room. There was a deep male voice, a high female voice, and even a child's giggle. They called my name in unison. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. I covered my ears, but the sound still flowed straight into my head, like raindrops falling on my mind. I screamed, begging them to be quiet, but the laughter only grew louder, echoing through the four walls. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open, cold wind rushing in, along with the smell of damp earth. I looked out into the hallway, but instead of the familiar light from the ceiling lamp, there was only thick darkness. A shadowy figure stood there, long hair covering its face, its body shaking as if being carried by the wind. It didn't enter, but I had the feeling it was waiting for me. It felt like the room was no longer a shelter, but a haunted box, pushing me out to something worse. I turned back to find my phone, hoping to turn off the app to escape the nightmare. But when I picked it up, the screen was no longer the familiar interface. Instead, it was black with drops of water falling inside. Then a pale face slowly emerged from the darkness. It was my face, but distorted. Its eyes were black and empty. It smiled coldly, its lips moving slightly. "There's no way out, Daniel." The phone was hot. I panicked and threw it to the floor, but instead of shattering, it flew away and still lit up. The sound of rain getting louder. Water spilled from the screen, flowing all over the floor. I was startled when I saw grey arms rise from the puddle, grab my ankles, and pull me down. I struggled, trying to get out, but the more I struggled, the higher the water rose, reaching my knees, then my stomach. Ghostly laughter echoed throughout the room, mixed with the sound of heavy rain. In a moment of panic, I looked up at the mirror on the wall. The version of me in there was no longer standing still. It was walking out of the mirror, step by step. Its eyes were bright white, its face expressionless, but its gaze was full of hatred. It approached, reaching out a cold hand to touch my shoulder. I screamed, feeling a cold air run through my body. The water was up to my chest. Hands from under the puddle kept pulling down. I tried to hold on to the bed frame, but the wood was slippery. All efforts were in vain. The version of me from the mirror whispered in my ear in a hoarse voice, "Daniel, you are just a guest in your own room. This is our place." I felt my consciousness fading, my eyes growing heavy. In that moment, the rain stopped. The room fell into absolute silence. I opened my eyes, found myself lying on the bed, dry, clean, as if nothing had ever happened. But as I breathed a sigh of relief, I realized the rain was still ringing. Not from the phone, but from inside my head. I understood that this familiar room was no longer safe. It had been taken over by invisible things, lurking ghosts, and the nightmare cycle was not over yet. I lay in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that everything had just been a fleeting nightmare. But the sound of rain still echoed in my head, not outside the window, but in my every thought. I told myself to try to sleep again. Maybe just resting would make everything go away. But my eyes couldn't close. My eyelids were heavy, but my brain was still awake, as if trapped between waking and dreaming. I turned to look at my phone. The screen was dark, but when I touched it, it lit up automatically. A strange line of text appeared on it, as if written in water. "Welcome back, Daniel." I shakily dropped the phone, but it didn't fall, but instead hovered in mid-air, its blue light reflecting throughout the room. From that light, small water droplets gradually coalesced into the shape of a door. I stared, realizing that the Rain Sounds app not only made sounds, but also opened a portal. The door formed in the air. Inside was pitch black. From there, I heard mixed sounds, the sound of rain falling, footsteps stepping on puddles, and even wheezing. I wanted to run away, but my legs couldn't move, as if they were nailed to the floor. The door slowly opened wider, and a figure appeared. It was another version of me, but thin, pale skin, eyes sunken like black holes. It walked out slowly, drops of water falling to the floor with each step. I gradually retreated to the corner of the room, my heart pounding. The other entity didn't say anything, just stared at me and half laughed. The dry laughter echoed throughout the four walls. I wanted to scream, but my throat was choked. No sound came out. It raised its hand, bony hand pointing towards me. Immediately, the water on the floor began to rise again, cold and cutting. The ghostly arms appeared again, rising from the water, this time more numerous, stronger. Grabbing my arms and legs tightly, I struggled desperately, my mouth emitting muffled cries. The cold hands pulled hard, causing my body to gradually sink. When the water reached my neck, I saw in the mirror opposite me not just one version of me, but dozens, hundreds of different faces. All of them were me, but distorted, deformed, each face smiling sinister. They whispered the familiar phrase in unison, "Stay with us." In that moment, I thought of the door that had just opened. It was still there, floating, the blue light still shining dimly in the flooded room. I gathered all my strength, pulled away from the grey hands, and rushed straight towards the door. The water swirled, blocking it, but I used all my remaining strength, rushed forward and jumped through. My whole body felt like it was falling into nothingness. I was floating in the darkness, surrounded only by the sound of the rain pouring down. Suddenly I landed, my feet touching the cold stone floor. I opened my eyes, realizing I was in a long, narrow hallway lined with old wooden doors. Each door vibrated slightly, as if something inside was trying to escape. I held my breath, listening, and clearly I heard banging, moaning, muffled screams. I walked slowly, my trembling hands running along the moldy wall. Each step echoed coldly. I tried to open a door. As soon as the crack opened, a skinny hand reached out and grabbed my arm. I panicked and yanked the door shut. Screams echoed from inside, pain and despair. I realized that each of those doors was another layer of the loop, where other versions of me were trapped. I started running down the hallway, trying to find a way out. But the hallway seemed endless, never-ending. The doors on both sides shook violently. The banging grew louder, as if all the selves were about to burst out. I ran until I saw another door, brighter than the others. I rushed towards it, threw it open. Inside was a completely dark room, with only a chair in the middle. On the chair sat a man sitting motionless. I approached, my heart pounding, and when I saw the face clearly, I froze. The man was me, but older. His eyes were lifeless, his mouth moving as he whispered a sentence. "Daniel, none of us can escape." I backed away, panic rising. I realized that this loop not only held me, but also countless other versions, all trapped in the same never-ending nightmare. And I had just begun my terrifying journey. I stood frozen in front of the image of my old self, sitting motionless on the chair. His whisper echoed like a knife cutting into my mind. "None of us can escape." I tried to back away, but my legs seemed stiff. In that moment, those lifeless eyes suddenly moved, looking straight at me. I clearly felt the cold spread throughout my body, as if a part of my soul was sucked out. I panicked, turned around and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The dark hallway welcomed me back. I gasped, my back drenched in sweat. But then, in the eerie silence, a sound rang out. Footsteps at first distant, but with each passing second it became clearer. The footsteps were slow, heavy, echoing in the narrow space. I tried to reassure myself that it might just be the echo of my own footsteps. But even as I stood still, the footsteps continued. Getting closer, I turned around, but the hallway was empty. There were only doors that shook slightly, as if blown by the wind. I swallowed, trying to keep going. The footsteps followed, rhythmic, in sync, but sometimes faster, as if trying to catch up with me. I started running, the footsteps behind me also ran. Each pounding sound echoed in the hallway like a drum urging death. I turned a small corner. The hallway curved like a maze. I stopped, pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, not daring to move. But only a few seconds later, right behind my ear, a long, heavy, cold breath rang out. I leaned back, turned around, but there was no one. The space was empty, only thick darkness. I shivered and walked on, and then one of the nearby doors opened. A cold wind blew out, followed by a soft laugh. I saw inside the dark room a silhouette standing next to the bed. It was another version of me, this time thin, gaunt, with dark circles under my eyes. It said nothing, just raised a finger to its lips to signal silence, then slowly closed the door. I stood still, my whole body cold. The whispers rang out again, this time not just in my head but from every door. They called my name, drawn out like the wind whistling through the cracks of the door. Daniel, Daniel, stay with us. I ran down the hallway, leaving behind the doors that shook as if they were about to burst. The endless hallway exhausted me. I stopped, sat down on the floor. Tears flowed not because of physical pain, but because of the invisible fear that was eroding my spirit. I wanted to wake up, wanted to escape this place, but it seemed the loop wouldn't allow it. I remembered the Rain Sounds app, remembered the dream loop mode. Maybe this was where it kept me, a world woven from the deepest fears in my mind as I sat there. A flickering light appeared at the end of the hallway. I stood up, trembling as I walked towards it. The light was coming from another door, shining white like an escape. I rushed towards it, my heart filled with hope, but as soon as I touched the doorknob, hundreds of hurried footsteps sounded behind me, as if a group of people were running after me. I panicked and threw the door open, jumping inside. The room was dark. Only the sound of rain hitting the corrugated iron roof could be heard. I realized I was in an abandoned house. The windows were broken, the curtains were torn and flapped in the wind. Rainwater splashed in, cold and penetrating my skin. In the corner of the room, an old chair was placed precariously. On it, a figure sat with its back to me. Its long hair was soaked, water dripping onto the floor. I hesitantly walked towards it, and as I got closer, the figure slowly turned around. Its face was pale, its empty eyes staring straight at me. But the most terrifying thing was that the face was mine. It opened its mouth, let out a hoarse laugh, then pointed towards the back door of the house. I turned to look, and in the rain, dozens of figures were standing still, all wearing my face, eyes lifeless. They slowly walked in, treading water, echoing throughout the abandoned house. I backed away, my heart wanting to jump out of my chest. The sound of the rain outside mixed with the sound of footsteps into a ghostly melody. I understood that I was not only stuck in a loop, but also being hunted by invisible versions of myself. And this loop was getting creepier than ever. I stood huddled in the abandoned house, the musty smell mixed with the smell of rain making my throat constrict. Shadows with faces exactly like mine were silently entering, each step stomping on the wet wooden floor. The sound of water falling from the ceiling mixed with the footsteps, resounding like a death drum. I looked around, searching for an exit, but all the windows were broken. Outside was only a thick curtain of rain and endless darkness. The first shadow stepped through the threshold, its soulless eyes staring at me. It said nothing, just continued to move closer. I backed away, my back touching the cold wall. Dozens of other figures also poured in, surrounding me from all sides. The whispers rang out in unison, not loud but clear. "Stay with us, Daniel." I tried to shout, but my throat was tight. Fear made my legs tremble. I picked up a piece of broken wood from the floor and waved it wildly at them. But the terrifying thing was that the piece of wood went straight through their bodies without leaving a trace. Those figures were not made of flesh and blood, but like invisible ghosts that took my own shape. I rushed towards the stairs at the end of the room, hoping to find another way. My footsteps pounded on the rotten wooden steps, emitting an eerie creaking sound. The figure behind me still followed slowly, not fast, not slow, but surely. I went down to the dark basement. The air was cold and thick, as if lacking oxygen in the darkness. My eyes gradually got used to it and realized that the basement was full of mirrors. Dozens of old mirrors were placed around the four walls. I approached one mirror, and instead of reflecting my current image, it showed me another scene. In it, I was lying motionless on the bed, eyes closed, mouth moving slightly as if talking in a dream. I recoiled in horror, then turned to another mirror. This time, it showed me being dragged down into the black water by hundreds of hands. Each mirror was a different version of my fate. All of them terrifying, all of them deadly. I ran round the tunnel, trying to find a way out, but everywhere the mirrors reflected horror scenarios. In my panic, I heard a sobbing sound echoing. The cry was not far away. It echoed from the largest mirror in the middle of the room. I moved closer, and my heart stopped when I saw in it an image of me sitting with my knees drawn up, head bowed, tears falling down. I looked more closely and realized that version raised its face, eyes pleading, mouth stammering. "Help me out, Daniel." I trembled and reached out to touch the mirror. Immediately, a hand reached out from inside, tightly grabbing my wrist. I panicked and pulled hard, but could not escape. The other face changed, from pleading to sinister. It grinned, its eyes white. "Welcome to the deepest part of the loop." I was pulled into the mirror. Everything around me was spinning like a tornado. My body was out of control. When I opened my eyes, I found myself on the rainy street again, the yellow lights, the endless road. But this time, I was no longer alone. All over the street, countless versions of me were wandering, eyes lifeless, mouths muttering incomprehensible words. Some stood still and stared, others crawled on the ground like animals. I held my head and screamed, hoping this was just a nightmare. The rain fell harder, the sound of it drowning out all sounds. I saw a dimly lit door at the end of the street, a glimmer of hope. But just as I was about to run, the other versions turned their heads towards me, screaming in unison. The ear-piercing sound echoed throughout the space, causing me to collapse. I realized that the exit was just another trap, a trick to keep me sinking deeper into the loop. In my despair, I thought about my real life, my job, my friends, the little things out there, but it all seemed so far away. I understood that I had entered a place of no return, and with each passing second, I was losing a part of myself. And as if to confirm that thought, a familiar low voice rang out through the rain. "Daniel, this loop is your home." I stood in the middle of the endless street, surrounded by distorted versions of myself. The sound of the rain pounding down heavily, drowning out the ghostly whispers. With every step I took, a series of soulless eyes turned towards me, as if I were the only prey left in this world. I didn't know where to run, but my instincts forced me to keep walking in the distance. Amidst the misty rain, I saw an old house appear. The windows were broken, the roof was sagging, the walls were mottled as if it had been abandoned for decades. But what made me shiver was that in those dark windows, I saw silhouettes standing silently, observing me from afar. No matter how fast or slow I walked, those silhouettes remained still, their invisible eyes following my every move. I stepped closer, the soles of my feet stepping into the cold puddles. When I reached the rotten wooden door, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, but behind me, the soulless bodies had begun to move, approaching in unison. Their footsteps echoed steadily, heavily, like a soulless army. I knew I had no choice but to enter the house in front of me. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly. Cold air from inside blew out, carrying the smell of mold and old damp earth. I stepped in, and the door immediately slammed shut behind me. The sound of the rain outside was blocked out, leaving only a terrifying silence. I stood in the dark lobby, my eyes straining to see clearly. Inside the house, the walls were covered with old picture frames. But as I approached, I was shocked to realize that in each frame was an image of me at different ages. Some of me was a child, some of me was a teenager, and some of me was an old, middle-aged man. All the eyes in the painting followed me, their lips moving as if they were about to laugh. I shivered, quickly turned away, but the feeling of being watched did not lessen. I walked deeper inside. On the dusty tile floor, my wet footprints were clearly imprinted, but strangely, parallel to those footprints were a series of other footprints. They were smaller, like a child's, and they had appeared before I entered. I turned around, but behind me was completely empty. The atmosphere was heavy. I began to hear soft laughter echoing from the floor above. I shivered as I walked up the creaking wooden stairs. The laughter continued, sometimes far, sometimes near, as if someone was deliberately teasing me. When I reached the second floor, a long hallway appeared, with half-closed doors on both sides. Cold wind blew through the cracks of the doors, carrying an incomprehensible whisper. I gently pushed open a door. Inside was a children's room. Toys were scattered on the floor, and a small bed was in the middle of the room. I approached it, and suddenly, the doll on the bed sat up, its glass eyes staring at me. I stepped back, my heart stopped beating. The doll slowly moved its lips, emitting a childish voice. "Welcome home, Daniel." I panicked and slammed the door shut, running out into the hallway. The laughter now echoed everywhere, no longer far away, but right next to my ears. The other doors shook at the same time, making a loud banging sound as if something inside was trying to escape. I rushed to the end of the hallway and opened another door. Inside the dark room, the lightning outside the window flashed, illuminating a scene that made me choke. The walls were covered with photos of me sleeping. Each photo was in a different pose, in my real bedroom. Some were very close, as if someone was standing right next to the bed. I trembled and stepped back, my hands cold. Who took these pictures, and why are they here? Just as I turned to run out, a tall black figure appeared in the doorway. It stood blocking the way, its body twice my height, its face hidden by its long, flowing hair. It didn't move, just stood there. I backed into the corner of the room, my heart pounding. The black figure slowly walked in, each heavy step making the wooden floor vibrate. It bent down, bringing its face close to mine. In a flash, I saw its empty, white eyes and its wide, unnatural smile. I screamed in despair, but the sound disappeared into the distance. And then, the house seemed to come to life, All the windows slammed shut, the pictures on the walls fell, and laughter echoed in every corner. I knew I had entered a haunted house, where every escape was an illusion, and the real horror was just beginning. The scream stuck in my throat disappeared in the dark room. The giant black shadow bent down, its soulless white eyes staring straight at me as if piercing through every layer of my flesh. I tried to turn away but couldn't. That gaze was like an invisible hook holding me tight. The wide smile on the black shadow's face twisted to the point that it seemed like it was about to tear my flesh apart. The space was suffocating. Each beat of my heart beat like a drum. Suddenly, the entire house shook violently. Paintings fell to the floor with a clatter. Mirrors shattered, and pieces flew everywhere. The black shadow retreated, then dissipated into the air like mist. I stood up, trembling, running out into the hallway. But the hallway was no longer the same. It stretched endlessly, with dozens of doors opening simultaneously on both sides. From each room, different versions of me stepped out. Some were skinny and bony, some had hollow black eyes, and some had wide smiles. They slowly approached, whispering in unison, "Daniel, we are one." I backed away, my hands shaking as I clung to the wall. My breathing quickened, cold sweat dripping down my face. I screamed that I wasn't them, that I just wanted to escape. But my screams faded, drowned out by the whispers that echoed throughout the house. The other figures closed in, the circle closing in. I was cornered, no way back. In a moment of despair, a door flashed at the end of the hallway. A bright white light shone out like salvation. I tried my best to rush forward, pushing past the figures. But as soon as I touched the doorknob, the entire house disappeared. I fell into a dark void, my body spinning weightlessly. The rain sounded again, heavier this time, like a funeral song. When I hit the ground, I found myself in a hospital room. The smell of antiseptic was strong. The fluorescent lights flickered. On the hospital bed, a man lay motionless, his face pale. I approached and was stunned when I realized it was me. A nurse walked in, her face hidden under a mask. She checked the heart monitor and then turned to look at me, her eyes white and lifeless. She whispered, "Daniel, you never woke up." I panicked and stepped back. My heart stopped beating. The sounds of the machines suddenly turned into the sound of falling rain. The hospital walls cracked, peeled, then turned into the old walls of an abandoned house. The hospital bed disappeared, replaced by a familiar wooden chair. On the chair sat another version of me, sitting still, mouth moving, repeating the same sentence. No one could escape this loop. I screamed, pounding on the wall, hoping to find a crack to escape. But the more I pounded, the wall flowed like water, soaking my whole body. The musty smell of rain rushed straight into my nose, making me suffocate. I struggled, trying to find a way out, but an invisible hand reached out from the wall and grabbed me. I fell, pulled into the black wall. In the pitch blackness, I heard the whispers again. But this time, they were no longer scattered, but in unison like a ghostly choir. All of them carried my voice, echoing in my head. "We are one. We never wake up." I wanted to scream, but my throat was clogged, as if filled with rainwater. Just as I thought I would be swallowed completely, a blue light flashed ahead. I saw the Rain Sounds app on my phone screen floating in the darkness. I tried to reach out and touch it, hoping to turn it off. But as my finger touched it, the phone screen cracked. From there, a series of white eyes opened, staring at me. I shuddered, knowing that this app was not just a tool, but a portal straight to an endless nightmare. And at that moment, I heard a knocking sound somewhere, slow and heavy. It didn't come from the house, nor from the hospital room. It seemed to come from inside my head. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks, then a whisper. "Daniel, open the door." The 3 slow knocks still echoed in my head, as if someone was standing right behind an invisible door in my mind. I held my head, trying to block out the sound, but the more I covered my ears, the louder it became. In the thick darkness, a faint line of light gradually appeared, like a crack in a door opening. The familiar whisper sounded again, this time soft but haunting. "Daniel, open the door." I trembled and stepped back, but the crack of light grew larger, turning into a distinct door right in front of me. It was not made of wood or metal, but seemed woven from the darkness itself. Thin strands of rain falling from the doorframe without stopping. I knew that if I stepped through, I would fall into another level of the loop. But my curiosity and fear of being trapped forever made me unable to resist. I reached out, my trembling hand touching the cold surface. The door swung open, a cold wind rushing in, making my whole body break out in goosebumps. I was sucked inside, as if weightless. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a strangely familiar room. It was my real bedroom in real life. The bed, desk, and nightlight were all in their right places. But there was something strange. All the objects were soaked, as if they had been soaked in the rain for many days. I walked closer to the desk, saw the phone still running the Rain Sounds app. The screen lit up, displaying countless small windows, each showing a different scene. I saw myself walking in the rainy street, saw myself being pulled down into the mirror tunnel, saw myself facing the giant black shadow in the house. Each frame was a nightmare, and all of it was repeating endlessly. I was stunned to realize that the loop was not just a dream, but countless layers of parallel realities that were holding me captive. Suddenly, one of the frames changed. It showed me sitting in my real bedroom, but not in the rain. I was awake, looking at the phone as at the beginning. But what made me shiver was that the version also turned its head to look straight at me in the frame, eyes wide, mouth moving. "Are you watching me, or am I watching you?" I stepped back, my heart pounding. Then the knocking sounded again, this time not in my head, but from the bedroom door. 3 slow, heavy knocks, shaking the doorknob. I held my breath, staring. The door knocked again, then a whisper echoed from the other side. "Daniel, let us in." I backed away slowly, but the door swung open. Outside was not the familiar hallway, but a dark, rain-soaked space. From that darkness, figures stepped out, all wearing my face. They were drenched, their eyes lifeless, their mouths repeating in unison, "We are one." I was cornered in the room, my hands clutching the desk lamp as my last weapon. But instead of rushing in, they just stood there, silently watching me. A shadow stepped forward, its face blurred, its voice broken as if it were coming from dozens of people. "Daniel, this is your home, but you no longer own it." I screamed, throwing the lamp at them. The light shattered, darkness filled the room. In that moment, I felt the ground shake. The room distorted, the walls and ceiling melted into black streams. I fell down, falling into an endless abyss. The sound of rain echoed everywhere, followed by a ghostly laughter. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the endless hallway again, dozens of doors lined up in 2 rows, as if they had never left. I collapsed, exhausted and desperate. I understood that every time I thought I was free, I was just opening another door leading deeper into the loop. And the terrifying thing was that this loop seemed to have no end. It had only just begun, and I had become the eternal prey of my own selves. I sat down on the cold floor of the hallway, exhausted from falling through endless loops. Sweat and rain mixed together, streaming down my face. The doors on both sides were still silent, but I knew that behind them were hundreds of other versions of me, all trapped, waiting for a chance to drag me down with them. I took a deep breath, trying to stay awake. I had to find a real way out, or I would forever become one of those ghosts. I stood up, walking slowly down the hallway. With each step, the space echoed as if I were walking in a giant tomb. After a while, I saw a different door. It was unnaturally lit, a bright white light shining through the crack of the door, so bright that it blinded me. I knew clearly that it was not like the other doors. It was like a junction, a decisive place. I approached, my hand trembling as I touched the cold doorknob. As soon as I touched it, a familiar whisper rang out. This time, it was my own voice. "Don't open it. There is no freedom behind this door." I jumped, my heart pounding. My hands froze, sweat pouring out, but a part of me urged that this was the only chance. I took a deep breath, then pushed the door open. A bright white light burst out. I closed my eyes reflexively. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in my familiar living room. The sofa, the coffee table, the TV were all intact. No longer the moldy or melted scene like before. In that brief moment, I felt relieved. Maybe I had finally woken up, but then I realized something was wrong. The TV turned on, showing me huddled in the dark hallway I had just left. The scene was clear, every detail was identical, and worse, I was looking straight at myself on the screen. The hand on the screen raised, waving slightly. I was stunned, my heart stopped. At that moment, all the windows in the house opened at once. The rain poured in, the wind howled as if it wanted to tear the room apart. From outside the rain, lifeless figures walked in, still my faces, pale and wet. They did not move slowly like before, but rushed in quickly, surrounding me. I screamed loudly, ran into the bedroom, and slammed the door shut. I trembled and leaned against the door, but then I heard the familiar 3-time knock. The knocking did not only come from outside the door, but also from inside the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling. The 3 slow knocks echoed everywhere, as if the whole house had come to life and was surrounding me. Whispers rang out from all directions. "Daniel, you cannot escape." I gathered up all my courage and opened the door, running out into the rain. But instead of seeing the familiar street, I found myself standing in the endless hallway again. Everything returned to the starting point. I was stunned, realizing that each door I chose would lead me back to the loop, albeit in a different form. In despair, I looked up and saw dozens of other doors hanging upside down, glowing brightly on the ceiling of the hallway. From those doors, hundreds of hands reached down, reaching out as if to pull me away. I collapsed, screaming in despair. I understood that the truth behind this loop was not a dream, but an invisible prison built from the very fear deep in my mind. And that was just the beginning of the terrifying, short, scary stories I was living. I looked up at the upside-down doors hanging from the ceiling, a brilliant blue light shining down on the hallway. Hundreds of skinny hands reached down, stretched out, wriggling like snakes. My heart pounded, my legs trembled. I tried to retreat, but the space seemed to expand with every movement I made, making it impossible for me to escape. Those hands lowered closer, their cold fingers lightly touching my shoulders, leaving a numb feeling. I screamed loudly, rushing forward, running like a madman. The sound of footsteps echoed, mixed with the howling wind from above. I saw another door glowing brighter, right at the end of the hallway. In a moment of despair, I rushed to it and threw it open. A blinding light engulfed me, pulling me out of the dark hallway. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of a giant room. The ceiling was extremely high. The walls were mirrored from top to bottom. My reflections were everywhere, but each reflection was different. Some were laughing evilly, some were crying, some had empty black eyes. I spun around, trying to find my true self, but the more I looked, the more lost I became. The reflections were no longer standing still. They started to move differently from me. Some raised their hands, some hit the mirror as if trying to escape. I backed away, panicking, when suddenly one of the mirrors shattered. A distorted version of me crawled out, skin wrinkled, mouth wide open, eyes white. It let out a horrible scream, then rushed straight towards me. I screamed, running away from that place, but the other mirrors also began to crack. Each reflection escaped, filling the room. They rushed towards me, eyes glowing in the darkness. I tripped, fell down in the middle of the room, and just as the series of shadows were about to pounce, the ground beneath my feet collapsed. I fell into an endless abyss, the wind whistling in my ears, the darkness swallowing all light. The sound of rain echoed again, this time pounding against my flesh. I thought I was about to disappear, but then I fell into a pitch-black water surface. The water was icy cold. I struggled, but each swing of my arms only made me sink deeper. Under the dark water, I saw countless faces appear, all of them mine, eyes wide open, mouths open as if calling for help. They grabbed me, pulled me down, mouths whispering in unison, "We can't escape." I struggled desperately, my body heavy, my breath shallow. But then, a strange red light flashed from below. I was sucked down, plunging into a new space. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a dark room, with only a wooden table, and on it was the familiar phone. The screen was still on, the Rain Sounds app running. But this time, instead of the sound of rain, the phone emitted a childish giggle, echoing throughout the room. I shivered, moving closer. The screen displayed only one option. Bold white letters. Open door. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached out. But as my finger almost touched the screen, the room shook violently. The walls cracked. Black shadows poured out like smoke. Invisible hands reached out from everywhere. I screamed, touching the screen. Immediately, another door opened, a bright blue light pulling me away. I knew clearly that I was only going deeper into this supernatural loop. Each level a new horror, and I didn't know how many more doors, how many more worlds of horror were waiting ahead. But one thing was for sure, I was no longer in control of myself. I was just a puppet in a game of a power beyond reason. A game where the only player was fear. As the blue light from the phone engulfed me, my body felt like it was in slow motion. When I opened my eyes, the scene in front of me had completely changed. I was standing in a square room, for empty walls, no doors, no windows. But the strange thing was that on each wall appeared scribbles, like drawn with chalk or charcoal. At first they were motionless, but after a few seconds, I realized they were starting to move. The simple lines gradually curved, turning into human shapes. At first they were just blurry silhouettes, then gradually becoming identical to me. All four walls turned into giant projection screens. Hundreds of versions of me were moving, turning their heads to look straight at me. The sound of rain echoed everywhere, but now it was like the sound effects for a horror movie being broadcast live. I stood still, cold sweat on my forehead. One of the images on the wall broke free, stepping out of the flat surface, transforming into a real entity standing before me. It looked like me, but its eyes were empty, its face stiff like an unfinished painting. It approached, its bony hand reaching out as if to touch me. I panicked and backed away, but behind me another figure stepped out from the wall, blocking the exit. In an instant, the room was filled with living painted figures. They moved limply, emitting a buzzing sound like an old camera. Each step they took left black ink marks on the floor, spreading like oil. I tried to find a gap, but the closed room did not give me a chance. The figures whispered in unison, "Daniel, you are now part of the story." I was cornered, my heart pounding. I swung my arms to resist, but my hand passed through their bodies like smoke, leaving only a cold feeling. Another figure rushed over, his face close to my ear, whispering in a distorted voice, "This is your own animated horror stories." I screamed, the sound echoing through the four walls, and then the drawings laughed in unison, the distorted laughter echoing like a broken speaker. Suddenly, the floor shook violently. The drawings on the wall twisted, turning into horrifying scenes. I saw myself being dragged into the water, saw myself sitting motionless in the hospital, saw myself slowly aging and dying on a wooden chair. Everything was like a horror cartoon, fast-forwarding before my eyes. I was spinning between a series of images, my head spinning, my stomach twisting in a panic. I saw a small crack on the opposite wall. From the crack came a white light, weak but clear. I rushed forward, punching it hard. The wall cracked open, debris flying everywhere. A crack in the door gradually opened. I didn't think much and rushed straight through. I fell to the cold stone floor, gasping for air. When I looked up, I realized I had escaped the drawing room, but I wasn't sure if it was really an escape. All around was another hallway, long and dark, the sound of rain still echoing from the ceiling. I leaned against the wall, feeling exhausted but also more anxious. I knew that I had only escaped one level of the loop, and countless more were waiting ahead. In the darkness, the familiar whisper rang out again. "Daniel, you're only halfway there." I staggered into the dark hallway that had just opened, each step echoing in the terrifying silence. My body felt like it had no strength left, but my instinct urged me to keep going if I didn't want to be swallowed by the darkness. After a few minutes of walking, I saw a single door with a faint light at the end of the hallway. I hesitated for a moment before reaching out to open it. The light coming from inside made my eyes squint. When I looked clearly, I was shocked to realize that I was standing in my own house. Everything was exactly the same as in real life. The familiar sofa set, the coffee table, the bookcase, and the picture frame on the wall. But the difference was that the entire house was immersed in the faint light of yellow lamps. The windows were all closed, and outside the rain was pounding on the roof like a hammer. I walked slowly, trying to reassure myself that I might have woken up. I sat down on the sofa, took a deep breath. There was no one in sight, no whispers, but the silence made me even more nervous. When I was alone, every little sound became a warning. Sure enough, Just a few seconds later, I heard footsteps on the second floor. The footsteps were slow, as if someone was deliberately letting me know they were there. I clenched my hands, my nails digging into my skin until they bled. I stood up, walking step by step towards the stairs. Each wooden step creaked under my feet. I strained my ears to listen, but the footsteps had disappeared. Instead, a whispering voice came from the bedroom upstairs. "Daniel, do you really think you're alone?" I swallowed, my heart pounding like it was about to explode. When I pushed open the bedroom door, I found the room empty. The bed was made, the windows closed, but on the desk, my phone was lit up. The Rain Sounds app was still open, the words Dream Loop flashing non-stop. I picked it up with trembling hands, trying to turn it off. But as soon as my hand touched it, the lights in the room went out. The whole house was plunged into darkness. Only the blue light from the phone screen illuminated my face. From downstairs came the creaking sound of the door opening. I held my breath, listening to every sound. Then came the slow footsteps, echoing in the living room. I knew I was home alone, but every sense screamed that I was no longer alone. The footsteps gradually approached the stairs, each wooden step creaking like a death signal. I retreated to the corner of the room, my hand gripping the phone, the blue light reflecting on the wall. The bedroom door slowly opened, darkness pouring in like water. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, hair-drenched, white eyes staring straight at me. I screamed, throwing the phone in that direction. The sound of breaking rang out. The light went out. In the pitch darkness, I heard a familiar voice whisper right next to my ear. "Daniel, you are never truly alone." The room was pitch black. The footsteps on the stairs had vanished as if they had never existed. I stood trembling in the silence, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were empty, the phone had shattered on the floor. But instead of complete silence, my ears began to hear the sound of rain. It was no longer falling outside the window, but directly in my head. The sound of rain was soft at first, like the sound of rain falling on the eaves, but it gradually became heavier. It poured into my mind, each drop hitting my thoughts. I held my head, trying to cover my ears, but to no avail. The rain in my head grew louder, mixed with a distorted whisper. "Daniel, don't run anymore. Daniel, stay with us." I screamed, but my scream was swallowed by the sound of rain. I staggered out into the hallway. The familiar house was now deformed, the walls peeling, the ceiling leaking, the rain running in streams. I went down to the living room, each step stepping on a puddle of cold water. In the middle of the room, the phone that I thought was broken lit up again, the screen flashing a strange blue light. There was only one word on it: listen. I didn't want to touch it, but my legs seemed to be controlled. I bent down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. Immediately, the sound of rain in my head turned into a giant choir. The sound of rain mixed with human voices. There were cries, there were laughter, there were screams, all blended into a strange music, making my brain feel like it was about to explode. The phone screen began to show images. I saw myself sleeping in a real room in real life. The body was motionless, breathing slowly, but beside my bed was a figure standing still. The hair was soaked, the white eyes stared at my sleeping body. I screamed, threw the phone hard, but it returned to my hand as if stuck. The sound of rain changed again. This time it sounded like footsteps in the water. I turned my head, seeing the hallway stretching endlessly. From the end of the hallway, familiar figures appeared again, all versions of me, but this time their faces melted like candle wax, pieces of skin falling off to reveal empty eye sockets. They approached, their mouths simultaneously emitting the sound of rain falling. Not voices. I stepped back, my whole body trembling. The first figure touched my shoulder, cold as ice. At that moment, I heard the rain in my head stop for a beat, to give way to a clear sentence. "Daniel, you are now a part of us." I screamed, broke free, and ran straight to the main door. I opened the door, but outside was no longer the familiar street. In front of me was only an endless rain, the water falling in a thick curtain. No more light, no more path. I stepped out, immediately swallowed. Rain splashed into my eyes, into my mouth, into my lungs, suffocating me. I tried to swim in the thick rain, but every movement was in vain. In the rain, I saw floating figures. It was all me, motionless, eyes closed, mouth open, sucking in the raindrops. I screamed. My scream echoed, then was drowned out by the endless pattering sound. I understood that the rain was no longer a natural phenomenon. It had become an entity, a world. And I was just a small grain of sand in it. As my consciousness faded, I heard the distant ringing of a phone mixed with the sound of the rain. The sound was like a callback, but at the same time it was like a farewell song. And I understood that the rain sounds loop had not ended. It had just begun. I struggled in the endless rain. My body felt like it was being held by thousands of invisible hands. Each raindrop that fell was no longer just water, but like a piece of memory. They poured straight into my head, forcing me to witness every piece of my past, every nightmare. I saw myself as a child, lying on the bed and listening to the rain through the window. Saw the sleepless nights, saw the moment I downloaded the Rain Sounds app to my phone. Each image flashed by as fast as lightning, but left a deep cut in my mind. I tried to surface, gasping for breath, but the thick rain swallowed me. In my despair, I saw a sparkling blue light in the distance. I swam towards it, despite my heavy body. When I touched it, I realized it was the phone. The screen was bright, the words "Dream Loop" flashing continuously. I trembled as I reached out to turn it off, but instead of turning it off, the screen displayed a new text. "Daniel, your story has been recorded." Then the screen flashed to a dark website, black background, white text. I realized it was an old forum where people often posted horror stories. The title was large: "The Rain Sounds app that traps you in a dream loop." My heart sank as I realized I was reading my own story. Every detail described exactly as I had experienced it. I stammered, unable to believe my eyes. I scrolled down and saw hundreds of comments from strangers. They said they had tried the app, had heard the sound of rain in their heads, had seen figures with their own faces. Some said they had woken up after days of sleeplessness, but others, never returned. I trembled, realizing my story was not just a dream, it had become a viral creepypasta, and I was no longer the only one trapped. Suddenly, the screen shook violently, the words on it distorted. The comments turned into twisted laughter, then a large line appeared: "Welcome to the archive." I threw my phone away in panic, but it hovered in mid-air, brighter than ever. From the screen, a series of black hands emerged, grabbing the air, then clutching at me. I struggled, but to no avail. The hands pulled hard, pulling me into the screen. I fell into another space, dark and filled with twisted laughter. When I opened my eyes, I found myself sitting in front of an old computer. On the screen, The creepypasta website was still open, but this time I was the one typing each line. My hand moved automatically, typing out paragraphs that recounted the very horror I was experiencing. I screamed, trying to stop my hand, but to no avail. With each word I typed, the screen behind me lit up, showing images of me being hunted, drowned in rain, surrounded by ghostly beings. The sound of rain echoed in the room, but this time it was accompanied by the tapping of a keyboard. I understood that this loop had become a legend, a viral story, and I was trapped in it. I was no longer Daniel, a normal person. I had become the protagonist of a living creepypasta, trapped in a story with no end. In a moment of despair, I looked at the screen, saw a new line appear, seemingly for those who were reading. "Are you sure you want to continue listening?" I shuddered, knowing that anyone who read or listened to this story could be caught up in it. And the sound of rain continued to play in my head, like a never-ending soundtrack. My whole body seemed to be twisted in the endless void, then suddenly fell to the ground. I opened my eyes, breathing heavily, and realized that I was lying on the cold, wet ground. Rain was falling heavily from the treetops above, each drop of water piercing my skin. I raised my head, seeing the surrounding dark jungle, tall trees, and the darkness. The sound of insects mixed with the rain created a strange music. I staggered to my feet, looking around. In the middle of the forest, there were a few old tents half-built, the fabric torn, the poles broken and tilted. A fire had died down, leaving only cold coals scattered about. There was no sign of life, but it was clear that someone had camped there. I walked over to a tent, lifted the wet cloth, and was stunned to see that inside were backpacks, shoes, clothes, everything intact, as if the person here had just disappeared in the blink of an eye. I stepped back, my heart filled with unease. The wind blew through the trees. The rustling of leaves sounded like someone whispering. I turned my head to look around, but saw nothing but darkness. However, my intuition told me that I was not alone. I continued walking around the camp, when suddenly I saw a wooden sign leaning against it. On it was a message blurred by the rain: "Do not stay overnight." I shivered, feeling like I had just read someone's final warning, before I could understand. Footsteps echoed from the forest, at first distant, then closer. I held my breath, hiding behind the tattered tent. In the rain, I saw silhouettes moving slowly between the trees. They were wearing camping clothes, but their faces were hidden by wet hair. Their eyes were white. Some silhouettes stood still, heads bowed, water dripping from their chins to the ground. The rest quietly walked around the camp like patrolling. I recognized familiar faces. They were all different versions of me. One of me wore a tattered raincoat. One of me was skinny and bony. One of me held a rusty knife in my hand. They moved unconsciously, but in an organized manner, as if they were guarding the camp. I trembled, retreating slowly, but accidentally stepping on a broken branch. The sound echoed in the rainy night, causing everyone to turn their heads to look. Dozens of white eyes lit up in the darkness, pinning me down. I ran, dashing through the tree roots, the footsteps chasing behind me, heavy and urgent. I felt like hundreds of hands were about to touch my back. In my panic, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. I rushed forward, realizing it was another tent, larger, closed. I pulled the tent door open, crawled in, and closed it right behind me. Inside the tent was dark, but there was a flashlight placed in the middle, the weak yellow light clearly illuminating a few objects. I saw a wet, tattered notebook, the cover torn, the handwriting blurred. I opened it, reading the last visible words. They came from the sound of the rain. Don't listen, don't sleep, don't believe there's a way out. I shivered, my hands shaking, realizing that the people out there were also victims. They came here to camp, but were eventually swallowed by the loop, turned into soulless shadows. Footsteps echoed outside the tent again, accompanied by a chorus of whispers. Daniel, it's your turn. My heart was pounding, the flashlight flickering as if it was about to go out. I held the notebook tightly, but when I raised my head, I saw a figure already standing in the tent, right across from me. His hair was wet, his mouth had a crooked smile. I realized it was another version of me, his eyes sparkling as if reflecting the entire rain outside. And I understood that this nightmare didn't stop at the house, didn't stop at the hallway or the hospital. It had followed me out into the woods, turning the entire deserted camp into part of the loop. The figure in front of me was still standing in the tent, its eyes reflecting the rain, flickering like two blue flames. I slowly retreated, but my back had already touched the cold, wet tent fabric, leaving no way out. It didn't move, just staring at me with a distorted smile, as if waiting for me to collapse. Outside, footsteps moved in unison, circling around, rushing like a ritual. The whole camp echoed with a heavy, ghostly sound, as if the forest floor was groaning. I clenched the wet notebook in my hand, muttering the words I had just read. Don't listen, don't sleep, don't believe there's a way out. But my ears were still surrounded by the sound of rain, each drop ringing in my head as clearly as a needle piercing my brain. I screamed, hoping to drown it all out, but the sound echoed back, mixing with the distorted laughter of the figure in the tent. It took another step, its long hand reaching out. I panicked, threw the notebook towards it. The notebook fell to the ground, opened. From the pages, thick black smoke billowed out, spreading throughout the tent. I coughed, my eyes stinging, and the figure seemed to melt, disappearing into the smoke. But before I could feel the relief, I realized that the smoke was not disappearing, but clinging tightly to my body. It was like thousands of invisible strings were wrapping around me, pulling me down to the tent floor. I struggled, feeling the ground beneath the tent gradually sink, opening up a dark space. I fell, hitting hard on a wet rocky ground. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a cave. The sound of rain still echoed from somewhere, dripping through the cracks in the rocks like a slow heartbeat. Inside the cave, other tattered tents were also set up haphazardly, but all were empty. I walked along, hearing the whispering closer with each step. My counterparts appeared again, but this time they sat in a circle around a dying fire. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, their lips moving the same sentence. Daniel, stay with us. I retreated in panic, but behind me were other figures. They closed in, not letting me escape. One figure raised his head, his face full of cracks, his voice echoing as if from underground. This is the haunted place that keeps us forever. The whole cave suddenly shook. The stone walls cracked. Each drop of rain falling turned into a thick black stream, spreading quickly across the cave floor. I was swept away by the water, pushed back. The other figures were not swept away, but stood motionless, watching me being swept away, their eyes empty as if witnessing an inevitable ritual. I struggled, screaming in despair, but my screams only echoed as the sound of rain when the water rose to my chest. I saw a wooden door floating on the water, glowing faintly. I tried to swim to it, hitting it hard. The door opened, sweeping me through the rushing water. I rolled in the darkness, then fell into an old room. The floor was covered in dust. The walls were hung with blurry picture frames. I walked over, looked closely, and shivered when I saw that they were paintings of the camp I had just left. Each frame depicted me being hunted, surrounded, dragged down. I trembled, knowing that this haunted loop not only trapped me in my memories, but also turned them into artifacts, like a museum of fear. And from behind me, I heard the familiar triple tap again. The triple taps sounded like a reminder that I could not escape, only go deeper into the endless haunted loop. I stood frozen in front of the wall hung with picture frames. Each picture was a piece of the nightmare I had just lived through, recreated in chilling detail. The rain camp, the endless corridor, the hospital room, all of them were here as evidence of another life. I reached out to touch one of the pictures, my fingers trembling as I ran over the surface. Surprisingly, the picture was not hard but soft as water. Ripples spread from the point I touched, and the image inside began to move. I saw myself in the picture, running through the rainforest. Behind me were dozens of silhouettes with faces similar to mine. I panicked and pulled my hand back, but the picture continued to move like a movie. The sound of rain from the frame echoed straight into my ears, so clearly that I took a few steps back. I turned to the other pictures, all of them moving at the same time, turning the room into a haunting cinema. The memories I had experienced were no longer in my memory, but had become objects, undeniable physical evidence. I wanted to deny it, wanted to believe that it was all a dream, but my trembling body betrayed me. Cold sweat poured out. My heart pounded like it was about to explode. I could feel every detail, every wound on my body that was still there. The scratches from the branches of the forest, the bruises from falling on the stone floor, and the icy coldness from being submerged in the black water. No dream had left such a real mark, and I understood that this was a true story, a part of my memory that had been imprinted on me. I slowly backed towards the door, but behind me came the familiar 3-beat knock. I turned around and saw a wooden door appear right on the plain white wall. It had no picture frame, no handle, only a hand-shaped indentation as if waiting for me to put it in. I hesitated, but the knocking echoed in my head, more urgent. I shakily placed my hand on the indentation. Immediately, the room spun, the wall disappeared, and I was sucked through the invisible door. I fell into a small, warm house, the yellow light from the fireplace. Everything was strangely familiar. I sat on the armchair. In front of me was a cup of steaming hot tea. Outside the window, the rain was still falling, but gently, peacefully. For a moment, I felt liberated, but then I saw an open diary on the table. The page was written in my handwriting, with the title, True Stories. The first line made my blood freeze. This is not a dream, but a real memory. I quickly flipped through the pages, but each line recounted exactly what I had experienced since downloading the Rain Sounds app. Every detail fit so well that it was chilling, not missing a single thing. I shivered, threw the diary down, but it fell right into my hand, as if it was glued. The last line automatically appeared on the page. The next listener will be a witness. I panicked, rushed out, but the wooden door slammed shut behind me. I was once again engulfed by the sound of rain, not just outside, but echoing from the ground, from the walls, from my own body. I realized that this memory would never go away. It was etched into reality, and I was just a link in a story that would last forever. I staggered in the rain-filled room, the diary still burning with words in my hand. I wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. With each page I opened, new lines appeared, not written by me, but as if someone else was writing them right now. The trembling, bold words, "Daniel, now it's your turn." I swallowed, a cold feeling running down my spine. I asked desperately, "What turn?" The answer appeared immediately, as if written in blood. Revenge. The air was thick. The darkness in the room vibrated like waves. I heard whispers ringing out in unison, all my voices mixed together into a ghostly chorus. They spoke of betrayal, of those who had laughed at me, abandoned me, those who had made me choose isolation and seek comfort in the sound of rain. Each word was like a knife cutting deep into my memory, dragging me back to the most painful moments. I tried to deny it, but the memories kept appearing in my mind. On the surrounding walls, the paintings changed again. This time, it was no longer my nightmare in the loop, but real-life scenes. The face of the old friend who had mocked me, the cold eyes of the colleague who had pushed me down, even the silhouette of the person I had loved who had turned his back. All appeared, their white eyes staring straight at me. The sound of the rain suddenly turned into a rhythmic tapping sound, slow like a drum. My avatars appeared around the room one by one, stepping out from the darkness. But unlike before, this time they did not attack, did not chase. They stood in a circle, surrounding me, whispering in unison, "We will help you, Daniel. Take revenge." I trembled, not understanding what they wanted. A figure stepped out, his face almost melting, but his smile cold. In his hand was a familiar phone, the screen lit up, displaying a list of names. I looked closely and was stunned to see that they were familiar names from real life, people who had hurt me. Next to each name was a small rain symbol, flashing like a signal. I shouted that I didn't want to. I wasn't the Avenger. But the figure leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Not you, but us." The space shook violently. The room transformed into a familiar neighborhood. I realized I was standing outside, the rain still falling heavily, the streetlights flickering. In front of me was a house, where my old friend used to live. I trembled, my heart pounding in disbelief. But then I saw in the window another version of me standing, staring inside with white eyes. That version turned to me, nodded slightly, and then disappeared. I understood that the loop didn't just want to keep me imprisoned anymore. It wanted me to be a tool for revenge. Those other versions were pushing me to the brink, forcing me to admit the anger I had buried for so long. And the sound of rain, that terrifying sound of rain, now harmonized with my heartbeat, echoing like an irresistible command. I collapsed, holding my head, screaming in despair. I didn't want to become a part of them, but my hands trembled, as if controlled, as I raised the phone. On the screen, the words in red appeared, "Choose your revenge." And I knew this loop wouldn't stop if I didn't choose. But if I chose, it meant I was no longer me, but part of the nightmare. The phone in my hand was brighter than ever, raindrops falling on the screen but unable to extinguish the flashing red light. The words "Choose your revenge" appeared and faded, like the breathing of a living creature. I trembled, feeling every nerve in my body tighten. Around me, lifeless versions of me stood in a circle, their white eyes glowing in the darkness. The sound of rain mixed with whispers, forcing me into a single choice. I screamed, saying that I didn't want to, that I wasn't them. But the figure in front spoke, low and distorted. "Daniel, you don't have the right to refuse. We all have to complete the loop." I held my head, trying to back away, but my trembling hand moved automatically across the screen. A list of names appeared, not just people I knew, but also strangers. I didn't understand why they were here, but next to each name flashed a raindrop icon, as if their fate had been sealed. I screamed, trying to throw the phone away, but it didn't leave my hand, as if it had merged with my flesh and blood. The screen changed to a new interface, showing me kneeling in the rain, surrounded by silhouettes. The scene I was living was reflected right there. I panicked, knowing that the loop no longer gave me time. The sound of the rain suddenly stopped. The space fell into absolute silence. The silhouettes also stopped moving, their eyes still fixed on me. In that silence, I could hear my heart beat, heavy and painful. Then from the screen rang out a cold voice, not mine, not any silhouettes, but a strange voice that echoed throughout the space. The last choice, Daniel. Join or disappear. I knelt down, tears mixing with the rain. I couldn't tell what was real and what was imaginary, only the feeling that I had gone too far to turn back. I touched the screen again, hoping to find a way out, but as my finger brushed past, the list of names disappeared, replaced by 2 glowing red words. Join us, I gasped, my heart pounding. The figures around me drew closer, the circle closing. I screamed one last time, the scream echoing through the sky, and then everything was engulfed in blinding white light. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a familiar bedroom. The alarm clock rang, morning light filtered through the curtains. The phone was on the table, silent, the screen dark. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was finally awake. But when I reached for the phone, the screen lit up, the Rain Sounds app already open. On the screen was just one last line of text. Thank you for joining. Outside the window, the rain began to fall again, steady and endless. I understood that I could never escape. I had become part of the loop, and whoever was listening to this story had stepped 1 foot in with me.